You didn't grow up gently. You didn't get to move through childhood at the pace your nervous system needed. While others were protected by innocence, you were paying attention, watching moods, reading silences, adjusting yourself to emotional weather that changed without warning. And if you've ever wondered why you feel older than your age, why you notice things others miss, or why you feel strong yet quietly exhausted, this is for you. Psychology tells us that when a child is forced into emotional awareness too early, something rare happens. The mind adapts, it sharpens. It learns how to survive without the safety it should have been given. Not by shutting down, but by becoming alert, thoughtful, and deeply perceptive. You didn't become who you are by accident. You became this way because you had. This video isn't about what's wrong with you, because nothing is. It's about understanding the traits that form when a child grows up too fast, and how those traits can feel isolating before they're understood. You may have been called mature, independent, strong, or wise beyond your years, but no one ever explained the cost of earning those qualities so early. Here, we're going to name what you've lived through in simple, human language. Not to reopen wounds, but to bring clarity. Because self-awareness doesn't weaken you, it frees you. And the moment you understand yourself, the story shifts from survival to choice. You are not broken. You are deeply adapted. And it's time you understood the strength hidden inside that truth. Part 1. You learned to read the room before you learned to be a child. Before you knew how to fully be a child, you learned how to observe. You learned how to scan faces, tones, pauses, and shifts in energy. Not because you were naturally anxious, but because your environment taught you that awareness was necessary. Psychology explains this as an early adaptation of the nervous system. When emotional safety is inconsistent, the brain prioritizes detection over play. Instead of asking, "What do I feel?" your mind learned to ask, "What's happening around me?" That question became automatic, quiet, constant. As a child, you may have known when someone was upset before they spoke. You could feel tension in a room. The moment you walked in, you adjusted your behavior without being told, lowering your voice, becoming helpful, staying small, or stepping up when things felt unstable. This wasn't maturity, it was protection. And over time, this awareness became part of who you are. As an adult, people may describe you as intuitive, emotionally intelligent, or perceptive. You notice what others overlook. You can read between the lines. You sense when something is wrong, even if everything looks fine on the surface. But what most people don't see is how tiring this can be. Because your mind doesn't turn off easily. You're often alert, even when nothing is happening. Your body stays slightly tense in conversations, relationships, and unfamiliar spaces. You may struggle to fully relax because part of you is always listening, watching, adjusting. This doesn't mean you're broken or anxious by nature. It means your system learned early that awareness equaled safety. The key shift comes when you realize this trait isn't something to erase, it's something to regulate. You don't need to stop being perceptive. You need to teach your nervous system that it no longer has to work so hard to protect you. When awareness comes from survival, it drains you. When awareness comes from choice, it empowers you. And the moment you understand this, you stop blaming yourself for being too sensitive. You begin to see that what you carry is not a flaw, but a finely tuned skill that deserves rest, boundaries, and self-trust. Part 2. You became independent too early, and it shaped how you connect. You learned how to stand on your own long before you were supposed to. Not because you wanted independence, but because relying on others didn't always feel safe, consistent, or possible. Psychology explains that when a child can't depend on emotional support in predictable ways, the brain adapts by turning inward. You stop reaching out, not out of pride, but out of instinct. You learn to self-soothe, self-decide, self-carry. Over time, this becomes your default way of existing. As a child, you may have handled problems quietly. You didn't ask for much. You figured things out on your own. You became capable early, and adults may have praised you for being strong, mature, or low maintenance, without realizing what that strength cost you. As an adult, this shows up in subtle but powerful ways. You're reliable. You don't panic easily. You handle pressure well. But when it comes to emotional closeness, Something feels complicated. You may want deep connection, yet feel uncomfortable leaning on someone. You might crave intimacy, but pull back when it actually arrives, not because you don't care, but because dependence once felt dangerous. Your nervous system learned a quiet rule: I'm safest when I don't need anyone. This can create an internal conflict. One part of you longs to be seen, supported and held. Another part resists, staying guarded, self-contained, in control. And you may judge yourself for this, wondering why connection feels harder for you than it seems for others. But psychology makes one thing clear: this isn't emotional coldness, it's emotional self-protection. Your independence is real strength. It's proof of resilience. But healing isn't about losing that strength. It's about expanding it, learning that you can remain strong and allow support. That closeness doesn't erase your autonomy, that trusting someone doesn't mean abandoning yourself. Independence kept you safe once. Now, awareness gives you the choice to decide when to stand alone and when to let someone stand with you. Part 3. Your emotional intelligence is high, but it was earned through loss. You understand emotions in a way that feels natural to you, but rare to others. You can sense what someone is feeling, even when they don't have the words. You know how to respond gently, how to listen without interrupting, how to hold space without judgment. But psychology tells us something important about this level of emotional intelligence. It often develops when a child is exposed to emotional complexity too early. As a child, you may have been surrounded by adults who were overwhelmed, unavailable, or emotionally unpredictable. You learned to pay attention not just to what was said, but to what was felt. You became attuned to subtle shifts: sadness hidden behind smiles, anger buried under silence, stress disguised as normalcy. This wasn't something you studied, it was something you absorbed. Over time, your mind became skilled at emotional interpretation. You learned how to respond in ways that kept things stable, calming others, understanding their reactions, making sense of emotional chaos. And because you were so good at it, you may have been leaned on, confided in, expected to get it. As an adult, this shows up as deep empathy and insight. People feel understood around you. They open up easily. They feel safe being honest. You see patterns in behavior that others miss. But there's a hidden cost to this awareness. You may be incredibly compassionate toward others while being harsh with yourself. You might excuse people's behavior easily, even when it hurts you. You understand why someone acts the way they do, sometimes at the expense of acknowledging how it affects you. Psychology calls this emotional overfunctioning, but in human terms, it means you learn to prioritize understanding over self-protection. Your emotional intelligence is not a weakness, it's a rare strength, but it needs balance. Understanding others doesn't require abandoning yourself. Empathy doesn't mean endurance, and insight doesn't mean self-sacrifice. When you begin to turn the same curiosity, patience, and compassion inward, something powerful happens. You stop using awareness to survive and start using it to heal. Your depth wasn't meant to weigh you down. It was meant to help you live with clarity, discernment, and self-respect. Part 4. You learn to carry responsibility that was never meant to be yours. Somewhere along the way, you learn to be responsible for more than just yourself, not because anyone clearly asked you to, but because you sensed it was needed. As a child, you may have felt emotionally older than the people around you. You noticed stress, conflict, or fragility in adults and instinctively tried to compensate. You stayed strong. You stayed calm. You avoided adding to the burden. You may have stepped into the role of the helper, the fixer, the one who keeps things together. Psychology refers to this as taking on emotional responsibility too early. When a child feels that stability depends on them, even subtly, the brain learns to associate worth with usefulness. You begin to feel valuable when you're needed, when you're reliable, when you can ease someone else's distress. As an adult, this pattern often continues quietly. You feel a pull to help even when you're exhausted. You notice others' discomfort and feel responsible for smoothing it out. You may struggle to say no, not because you don't have boundaries, but because your body associates withdrawal with guilt. You might tell yourself, "It's not that big a deal," or "I can handle it," while ignoring the slow accumulation of emotional weight. And over time, This can lead to burnout, not from doing too much, but from carrying what was never yours to hold. This doesn't mean you're codependent or weak. It means your empathy developed in an environment where responsibility replaced safety. The shift begins when you understand this responsibility is something you choose, not something you owe. You are allowed to care without carrying. You are allowed to step back without abandoning anyone. Other people's emotions are not a reflection of your worth or failure. Your capacity to support others is real, but it's not meant to be limitless. When you learn to place boundaries around your empathy, you don't lose your kindness. You protect, and in that protection, you finally make room for yourself. Part 5. You struggle with rest, ease, and letting your guard down. Rest doesn't come easily to you. Even in quiet moments, part of you stays alert as if something might go wrong if you relax too much. Psychology explains this as a nervous system that learned safety through readiness. When peace was unpredictable in childhood, your body adapted by staying slightly on at all times. Calm didn't last long enough to trust, so stillness began to feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. You may notice this in small ways. You feel guilty when you're not being productive. You struggle to fully enjoy free time. You might fill silence with tasks, thoughts, or distractions, not because you're restless, but because your system associates movement with control. As a child, staying ready may have helped you anticipate emotional shifts, prevent conflict, or protect yourself from disappointment. But as an adult, that same pattern can keep your body from fully recovering. This doesn't mean you don't know how to rest. It means rest was never taught to you as something safe. Joy, for you, often comes in subtle forms: quiet focus, deep conversation, solitude that feels meaningful rather than empty. You don't crave chaos. You crave permission to slow down without consequences. The work now isn't forcing yourself to relax. It's teaching your nervous system, gradually and gently, that nothing bad happens when you pause, that you don't have to earn rest, that your value doesn't disappear, that stillness isn't neglect, it's regulation. Learning to rest is not about becoming passive. It's about letting your body know it no longer has to be on guard to survive. And when rest becomes safe, your strength doesn't disappear. It finally becomes sustainable. Part 6. You often feel different or alone, even when you're not by yourself. You can be surrounded by people and still feel separate, not disconnected in a dramatic way, but quietly, internally, as if you're standing slightly outside the circle. Psychology explains this as a result of early emotional self-reliance. When you were forced to grow up too fast, your inner world developed earlier and deeper than most. You learned to think, reflect, and process internally instead of outwardly. Over time, this created a strong inner independence, but also a sense of difference. You may notice that small talk drains you. Superficial connections feel empty. You crave depth, honesty, and meaning, but those aren't always easy to find. So even in company, you might feel unseen, not because people don't like you, but because they don't always reach the layer where you live. As a child, being inward may have been safer. It gave you control, it gave you clarity, and it taught you how to be with yourself without falling apart. As an adult, this can feel like loneliness, but it's not the same as isolation. It's awareness without resonance. You see patterns others ignore. You think before you speak. You feel deeply, but you don't always express it easily. This can make you feel different, or even misunderstood, especially in environments that reward surface-level interaction. But psychology reframes this, not as social failure, but as internal grounding. You learned early how to stand on your own emotionally. That's not something everyone has, and while it can feel lonely at times, it also means you're not easily swayed, dependent, or lost without external validation. The work now is not to become less deep, but to find spaces and people where depth is welcomed. To remember that being different doesn't mean being alone. It means your inner world is rich, stable, and selective. And when connection does happen for you, it's not casual, it's real. Conclusion: growing up too fast didn't take something away from you. It gave you something, though no one explained it at the time. You developed awareness before comfort, strength before softness, insight before ease. And because of that, You may have spent years wondering why life feels heavier for you, why you think more deeply, why you feel separate even when you're connected. But psychology makes this clear. You are not carrying damage. You are carrying adaptation. Everything you became had a reason. Your independence, your emotional intelligence, your ability to self-regulate, self-reflect, and stand on your own. These traits were built in response to an environment that required you to be more than a child, before you were ready. And now comes the most important shift. You are no longer that child. What once had to be automatic can now become intentional. You don't need to stay guarded to stay safe. You don't need to carry everyone to be worthy. You don't need to earn rest, connection, or care. Your depth is not a burden. It's a foundation. Your difference is not isolation. It's discernment. Your loneliness is not emptiness. It's inner stability waiting to be shared. Healing doesn't mean undoing who you are. It means finally allowing yourself to live from your strengths instead of surviving because of them. You grew up fast. Now you get to grow freely.